Good morning, and welcome to the Research Breakdown series titled Foundation Relations versus Sponsored Programs. My name is Tiffany Willoughby, Research Education Programs and Outreach Manager in the Office of Research at the University of Texas at Dallas. I will be your moderator. Joining me today to deliver the period of instruction are Emily Lacey, Associate Director, Office of Sponsored Projects, Lena Uhing, Assistant Director, Development and Alumni Relations, and Julie Piccirillo, Director of Foundation Relations, Development and Alumni Relations. Julie Piccirillo is Director of Foundation Relations in the Central Development Office at UT Dallas. She has 10+ years of experience within nonprofit and higher education philanthropy, specializing in corporate and foundation partners and grant writing reporting. As Assistant Director of Foundation Relations, Lena secures grant funding to support UTD's important research and student success initiatives. She has been with the university for 3 years and previously worked as a fundraiser for a youth homeless shelter in Dallas. Welcome, Julie and Lena.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. As you heard, I'm Julie, and I'm Director of Foundation Relations in the Office of Development and Alumni Relations. Across our entire department, myself and my team works to maximize philanthropic partnerships with alumni friends and corporate and foundation partners. Our mission on what we call the FR team is to work with university schools, programs, and teams to advance UT Dallas's strategic priorities. We do this by developing and managing sustainable and impact-driven relationships with corporate and foundation partners, and I would also add nonprofit and non-governmental partners. Together with UTD faculty members and program managers, we work to secure charitable gifts and grants that help to attract and retain the best and brightest students and faculty, and enhance programs, departments, and outreach efforts that produce significant contributions for North Texas and society as a whole. We serve as a central point of contact for both internal university constituents and our top foundation partners. What that means is our team acts as a resource and helps to cultivate and navigate mutually beneficial local and national partnerships. The slide that you're looking at now provides a few of the partner names that we work with regularly. You may see some familiar names on this list and even some corporate names. This is because many corporations have philanthropic arms or foundations. We are also tightly integrated with the Office of Corporate Relations and often work hand in hand with our colleague there. Overall, our goal is with these top partners is to make sure that they are well connected to UT Dallas, that they understand our priorities and that we understand theirs, and that they receive regular updates on the impact of any support that they provide to the university. You might be wondering how exactly we do this. First, like I mentioned previously, we view ourselves as internal and external connectors. Our centralized team acts as a university-wide touchpoint for many of our top foundations, as well as our internal constituents. We're also collaborators. We have broad reach and knowledge across the university and stay up to date on the activities and interests of foundations. This allows us to match university needs with external funding opportunities, and even in some cases bundle multiple requests into what we call comprehensive requests. This way, our top funding partners are receiving one large-scale request rather than fielding dozens of smaller requests from across the university, which can be confusing to the funder and even conflicting for the university at times. And finally, we're experts in the processes and requirements to build and pitch grant-ready projects, programs, and research. In the CFR world, relationships are very important, but equally important to many of our funders is program strength and being able to demonstrate clear objectives, outcomes, and methods to evaluate success. I thought this slide would be interesting to include, and it offers some context into some of the giving trends and the capacity of foundations overall. You can still see that on the pie chart that while individual giving, it still is sort of king of the castle in philanthropy, foundation giving is substantial. By and large, foundations' missions revolve around solving societal ills and providing public benefits. In recent years, things like education, underrepresented communities, research, and game-changing ideas have been trending. Last year and this year was a little bit different, and many foundations' focuses have narrowed. Two major impacts that have significantly altered corporate and foundation giving in 2020 and will continue to do so in 2021 are the COVID-19 pandemic and its effect on public health and the economy, and also widespread condemnation of police brutality and systemic racism. In response, we've seen many funders in Texas and across the nation step in to provide what we call direct safety net funding for immediate needs like food, housing, and medical care. And they've also increased their grant making and philanthropy focused on alleviating racial inequality in all of its forms. For example, this summer, Bank of America and its associate Bank of America Foundation announced a $1 billion commitment to advance racial equality, civil rights, and economic mobility. Another trend that we're seeing is more funders combining their resources to increase cumulative impact, and we expect to see it continue long term. North Texas Cares is a good local funder collaborative example. Since March, more than 30 CFR funders came together to distribute more than $40 million to area nonprofits to counter COVID-19 impacts through a single application process. This means that instead of submitting the same project multiple times to different funders with often totally different applications, we only had to compile and submit it once to reach a wide funder audience. North Texas Cares opened another request for proposals this past fall. And in addition to COVID-19 funding, also added a new focus for an area on social justice. We like this new trend and hope to see more collaboration on the funder side of things. We believe, in accordance with these new trends, that UTD is actually very well aligned to adapt to these shifting priorities and processes, whether it be seeking funding for student emergency funding and needs, research related to the pandemic, and increasing focus on building diversity across the institution, promoting college access, retention, and also affordability. The giving landscape at UT Dallas, you'll see mirrors the national landscape slide. This is just a chart of our fiscal year 2020 giving. And it's worth noting that we do have higher than average corporate giving, and this is due to the benefit of the DFW region that we're located in, and we're blessed with a lot of very solid economic activity. One thing to take a look at here that I wanted to point out is the average gift and grant size of foundations. So I think we've all seen and heard some of the mega grants from places like the MacArthur Foundation or the Gates Foundation, but I do want to stress that the reality is usually foundations are giving in the 5 to 6 figure range rather than in the millions. It's not unheard of, and certainly UT Dallas has benefited from some 7-figure and higher gifts. But again, that average is 5 to 6 figures. Our office tends to tackle grants and gifts in the $25,000 range and above. And now I will turn it over to my wonderful colleague, Lena.
Thank you so much, Julie, for that wonderful overview. We thought it would be helpful to provide a brief overview of what it's like to work through the process of soliciting foundation funding. Although it can be very similar to working with federal agencies, in some cases there are some key differences. The process normally begins when a faculty member identifies a funding opportunity. We have a number of different resources listed on the Office of Foundation Relations website that we will provide a link to at the end of the presentation, with some databases that are searchable by area of interest for major foundations. These include Foundation Directory Online as well as Pivot. We also regularly work with faculty members who hear about funding opportunities either from their colleagues or perhaps conferences that they have presented at. So we encourage everyone to keep their ears open for opportunities that may come their way. When you do identify a foundation opportunity that you're interested in pursuing, please reach out to our team to discuss the strategy for the request. This can look different depending on the nature of your project. Sometimes we take a very light touch. Sometimes we can assist with more involved proposal development or editing help as needed. Just depends on what your needs are. And I'll go into that in a bit more detail a little bit later on in the presentation. I will note that one of the most important pieces of our work is to report outcomes back to the foundations. Private philanthropic foundations typically require outcome reporting at least annually, but some do require 6 months reports as well. So Julie and I are careful to track all of those deadlines and work closely with faculty and staff members to get those outcomes back to the foundation representatives as needed. Please note that working with foundations can be quite a lengthy process, which is very similar to working with federal agencies. It can be take between 6 months, and that's typically if you're working with a foundation that the university already has a relationship with, all the way up to 18 months and sometimes even longer than that. So foundations are not usually an ideal option if you're working on a project that needs funding very quickly. So as I mentioned just on the previous slide, our team offers different levels of service to help staff and faculty secure grant funding. You can see some examples of what we provide listed on this slide here. I did want to draw your attention to bullet number 4, assembling institutional support materials for grant applications. If you're interested in applying to a foundation and you notice that the application requires a 501c3 status, please do be sure to reach out to our office. That's a signal to us that we might need to funnel the application through the University of Texas Foundation, and that's something that our office coordinates. On the right here, you can see the image that just popped up is an example of a stewardship report that we recently provided to a foundation funder who supported the Academic Bridge program, which is one of our great student success programs here on campus. So again, as I mentioned, we are a resource for staff and faculty to report their great work back to the foundation, and that positions the university to go back and reapproach foundations again and again. And as Julie mentioned at the beginning of our presentation today, that's one of the ways that we develop those sustainable relationships with our foundation partners. We wanted to provide just briefly some tips and best practices for any faculty and staff members who might be on this call today who are interested in developing grant applications. And these are some of the items that we might discuss with you when you reach out to our office to talk about submitting an application. So now more than ever, foundations are very interested in impact and seeing the outcomes of their philanthropic investments. So that is something that our team is well positioned to help faculty and staff members develop as they begin the process of writing their grant applications. We can help you really flesh out your outcome metrics and make sure that they align with a foundation's philanthropic priorities. I also wanted to just flag your attention to bullet number 3. If you are interested in soliciting foundation funding and you are working with other staff or faculty from different centers on campus or schools or even other universities, that is a great thing to highlight in your applications. As Julie mentioned, there is a movement right now within the foundation and corporate funding community as well to favor projects that feature collaboration. And these are all things that our office can help with. So please do give us a call. So I wanted to briefly provide an example of what working with our office actually looks like. So the Simons Foundation is a New York-based foundation that funds research across a wide spectrum of disciplines. Several years ago, we had a faculty member contact our team after learning about the foundation's collaboration grant for mathematicians. And I did just want to mention, put out a feeler for you guys. That RFP is currently open right now. So if there are any mathematicians on the call, that is a currently open opportunity. I believe it's due January 28th. That does fund travel and publication costs related to mathematics research. So be sure to check that out if that sounds like something that might be of interest. But we worked closely with the faculty member to prepare their application. As you can see here, we provided a full review of the grant, including editing, assembling institutional support materials, and coordinating the submission process. Fortunately, and we love when this happens, of course, the foundation approved the project and awarded that faculty member a 5-year, $42,000 grant in support of their research. That wasn't the end of the story, however. Since that was a 5-year grant, our office continues to work with that faculty member to ensure their reports are submitted in advance of the required deadlines. That particular foundation requires biannual reporting, so we remain in close contact with the faculty member. But that's just an example of what it can look like when you work with our office and how that process actually works. I believe we're going to have time for Q&A after our awesome colleague Emily gives everyone a brief overview of her great work. But these are some common questions that Julie and I field regularly in our work. The biggest one I wanted to point out was probably that first item about indirect costs, because that is a big difference between our world and some of the work that OSP does. It's important to note that private philanthropic foundations generally cover no more than 10 to 15% of indirect costs, and asking for the standard 50, I believe it's 53%, Emily will correct me, cost rate can actually even get proposals disqualified in some cases. So that's something to keep in mind when we're talking about foundation funding. As I noted earlier, this can be a lengthy process, so be sure to allot plenty of time to work through this with us. And there's just some more information there that everyone can refer back to as needed. And this is how to contact us if you need anything, and also a link to our website, which has some great resources there for people who are interested in getting started with writing grant applications to foundations. There are some templates there, as I mentioned, funding databases as well. So we hope to hear from you soon. Thank you so much. And now I will turn it over to Emily to talk more about OSP.
Thank you very much, both Julie and Lena. We appreciate your time. Our next speaker is Emily Lacey, Associate Director, Sponsored Projects. Emily has been at UTD for 10 years. Prior to UTD, she spent 5 years in the Central Research Office and 1 year in the Corporate and Foundation Relations Office at the University of North Texas. The virtual platform is yours, Emily.
Thank you very much, Tiffany. So as my colleagues in Foundation Relations talked about their world, now we will talk about my world in the Office of Sponsored Projects. So what exactly do we do in OSP? And the simple explanation is we help faculty submit their research projects. That can be to any funder. It could be to a foreign sponsor, the federal government, which is the most likely, state, for-profits, any sponsor can be in our world. And so we're going to help faculty all the way from finding the funding to getting the award and to closing out the award. So how exactly do we do that? So the first step is you have to have a solicitation that you want to apply for. And so as Lena said, we have options as to how faculty can find that funding, and Pivot is the best for our world because Pivot is our database that has all the funders in it, and it allows the faculty to look for their funding in their science by including and excluding parameters, and so it's the best resource. We also will provide training and education on everything from sponsor policies to updates to the federal regulations. Anything that will impact you, we will let you know, but we're not going to tell you anything that's not going to have any bearing on what you are doing. So we only want to give you the information that will help it speed it through as you submit your proposals. The main bread and butter of what we do is submit proposals. And so what my staff in my office does is we help the faculty hopefully reduce the burden of actually submitting the proposal and just focus on their science. So we try and get all the rest of the stuff out of the way so that just the science pieces are in the faculty's hands. And so that's your baby. That's what we want you to focus on. So we will work to make sure that all of the compliance pieces are taken care of so that your proposal doesn't get rejected for something as simple as your margins were too big. That's our end goal. We also have relationships at most of the sponsors. We usually have a counterpart that we can talk to at any of the agencies, and that way we have a better understanding of what exactly they're looking for, what they're focusing on these days, and we can pass that along to you. Once the proposal gets submitted, we will help you if you need to revise it, if you need budget revisions, or if any changes have occurred. And once the award comes in, we will negotiate the award terms and conditions to make sure that everything is acceptable for us. We also initiate the cost center generation, and then we'll help you with everything that is non-financial in the post-award world. So if you needed to add like a postdoc, or if you left the university and you need to transfer it, we'll be the ones that guide you through that process. So here's just a snapshot of our research funding. So this is just for first quarter of FY21. So that is September through November. And so we have had $22 million in awards, and that was 57 awards brought in that. And then we submitted 319 proposals. For a comparison, for FY20, for the entire year, we submitted 1,245 proposals. Now, that's about 100 proposals a month, so that's why it's very important to get on our radar as soon as possible, which we'll talk about in a little bit. We also had 73 million from 187 awards, so we're pretty much on track for where we were last year. So how do you work with OSP? So you have to find the funding opportunity. You can't submit a proposal unless they obviously want to fund you, and the science matches your science. You want to make sure that there is a connection there. Once you identify the funding opportunity, it's imperative to contact us as soon as possible. And so you would need to create a record in our OR portal, which lets us know that you have identified something that you want to pursue. And it's incredibly important to give us as much time as possible so that you can get in our queue and we can let you know if, hey, there's 20 other proposals going out that day, and then you'll know that you need to get it to us earlier so that we can move it to the front of the queue. We will help you develop and submit your proposal. The sooner we have the solicitation, the sooner we can look through it and see if there's anything that we're going to need to really pay attention to, or maybe even request that it be removed. We want to make sure that all the terms and conditions are acceptable and that there's not any special items that we have to take note of. Like the key things these days are a lot of projects will require a very specialized data management plan, and that will involve coordination with our data management group. Some of them will even require you to have a whole entire separate network setup that you can work on, and that takes time. So it's important that we know that up front so that we can get the ball rolling and get all of the compliance departments involved so that we can be there by the time the award arrives. When you submit your proposal, we will work to make sure that you are going to pass all of those compliance checks we talked about. We want to make sure that your budget is accurate. And if you look at the bottom of this slide, it says the turnaround time for federal agencies is usually at least 9 months. I think that's probably an actually conservative estimate. It's usually more like 12 months. And so what you're submitting now is not going to happen for a year. So you want to make sure that the prices that you're using are the prices that will be in effect in a year. And so we will make sure that you've thought of everything, that the rates are accurate, and that you have the money to do the project that you proposed. That's the most important thing. You want to be able to do what you propose because that is what you said you would do. And then once the award comes in, we will help you negotiate it, and then we will keep you informed of any report deliverables that you have to make and do the closeout process. So, which office should you go to? Should you just roll the dice and see what happens? You can do that. We are happy to help anyway. The OSP, the key for OSP is the word complex. You'll see it several times under the sponsor agreements description. And this is because most of our awards are from the federal government or from a state regulation, something with lots of rules. And so there are limits to how you can spend the money. You can't move the money around, or if you have reports that you have to do, sometimes the payment is tied to those reports and you can't get your money unless you've done what you said you were going to do and they approve the way you did it. Or there are restrictions on who you can hire on the project. You can't have foreign nationals. Those are all things that are a sponsored agreement. And it's basically a quid pro quo relationship where you said you're going to do this, so they're going to give you money to do that, and then they're going to get their research and their funding, their results in return for that. Whereas the foundation relations group is philanthropic grants. So the foundations are trying to do good for the society, the greater good. So they are not going to be as strict in how they are giving their money because it's more just, it's almost like a gift. They are trying to solve a problem. You've said that you would like to solve this problem and they're going to give you money, and all you have to do is report back and say, hey, this is what I spent your money on. That is fine because that report is not tied to anything. They just want to know what impact their funds had. But if they start veering off into another world where they're saying you can't do this or you have to provide this in order to get this, that is veering into the OSP world. There are lots of times where we will submit a proposal or foundation relations will submit a proposal and we'll assume that it's going to come in the way that we think. Like foundation relations is assuming it's going to be a philanthropic grant, and then we get hit with a 12-page proposal or award. And if it's 12 pages, there's obviously going to be some terms and conditions in there. And so we work together to figure out which of us is the most appropriate office to handle it. And so we don't expect you to be able to figure that out or to know up front, but we will work together to figure that out. And so you can contact any of us, anybody in either office, and we'll be happy to help you. We'll figure out which we think is the most appropriate at the onset. And if it changes, that's fine. It's no big deal if we have to move it from one office to the other, but we'll get it taken care of by whichever is the most appropriate. So tips and best practices, plan ahead. As Lena said, you have to plan ahead. You have to take lots of time to get your proposal into the best shape. The one example I can give is that if you are developing your proposal, but you haven't even thought about your budget, there may not be that cohesiveness between the two. Like maybe in your proposal, you said you were going to do a whole summer camp, but then your budget has no budget for a summer camp. You've got to really think it through and plan it. And the best way to do that is to get peer reviews or to get somebody else to review it. And if you are just starting working on it 2 weeks before the deadline, that's not going to happen. In our office, we do have the ability to send your proposal for an outside review. We have external consultants and a contracting firm. And so the more time we have, the more of those resources we can provide to you. Your OSP specialist is your best friend. We want to be your cheerleader. We want to help you. We get super duper excited when you get awarded, and that's always our end goal. So the more we understand what you're trying to do and what your science is, keeping in mind that, we're not scientists, so layman's terms will work best. But if we know what you're doing, we can we will be able to send you targeted opportunities. There are a lot of times where funders will send us solicitations directly to the central office, and if we don't know somebody who's interested in it, we can't send it on. But if we have at least some idea of what you're doing, then we can send those your way. We also want to know what your style is. Are you someone who wants to only communicate via email, or do you want that face-to-face? Do you want just to be left alone and you'll be fine at the end, or do you want us to give you deadlines? The more of a relationship and a rapport we build, the better the process is, and the less stressful it is. It's just a seamless process at that point, because as you know, anytime you're dealing with deadlines, it can be stressful. So we try and take that away, and it can help the more we know you. Our seed grants are a wonderful opportunity to help you get your foot in the door. So we have many, many seed grants. You can choose from a different variety. They can range from trying to build a collaboration with other people, to increase your interdisciplinarity, to get background studies, or maybe get some publications on your biosketch, any of those things. We even have one that is specifically for resubmissions, where if you submitted a proposal and you were just under the pay line, you can submit for the seed grant and use that money to address the weaknesses that were identified so that it will maybe push you over into the award status. Our Road to DC program is especially good for interacting with program officers. So we will mentor you on how to go about that and help coach you through the actual process, help you get in contact with the program officer. And this is the key with the federal programming. The more you know your program officer, the better off you are, because they'll be able to tell you what the focus is and whether they have funding. And once they know your name, they may even contact you and say, hey, I've got some extra funding. Well, I remembered your research. I can help you out. And so that is a very invaluable opportunity. And we have lots and lots of resources. We have samples, we have templates, we have checklists. We even have a funded proposal library. And this is awesome because it's full proposals that have been awarded from a range of agencies. And so you can just log in. It's behind a firewall, so it's only available to UT Dallas people. And you can look at the proposals. You can see how they arranged it, what order they went in, what were their headers, how did they speak to the agency mission, what lexicon did they use. I mean, it's not meant to copy, it's just meant to give you an idea of what they found as a fundable program. And so that is great. All right, so Q&A. So Lena touched on the indirect costs. So first, indirect costs are costs that are not directly attributable to the project. So examples of that are the lights, landscaping, libraries, your computer, your pen and paper, me and my staff. We're all considered indirect costs because we're all necessary in order for you to do the project, but you can't say exactly how much of that time was spent on that particular project. And so we have negotiated a federal rate with the federal government, and we can charge 56% on all of our projects. And so anything that goes through sponsored projects will have indirect costs on it. The only exception to that is if it is an agency that has a written policy that is in effect for all of their projects. Then we would go with whatever that rate was. And so the next question is, when do you have to have documents to us? And why do you need that time? So 4 days is the minimum. And by minimum, I really mean minimum. We need as much time as you can give us. We have an 8-page checklist, and that is 8 pages of checks that we have to run just on a regular solicitation. That's not counting something that's actually targeted to a specific program. And so the more time you give us, the more we can increase the success rate that you can have on your proposal, because we'll identify all of those things that we need to have, and we'll make sure that there's nothing that they can find to either not approve or just flat out get rejected. We want to make sure we get you past those doorkeepers into the actual people who see the science and see the amazing, wonderful things that you're doing. And if you give us that time, we can help with that. And then tenure reports. So we get asked a lot about tenure reports, and yes, we provide tenure reports to the provost. She sends us a list every year of all the people up for promotion, whether it be from assistant to associate, associate to full professor, and then the PPEs for the professors. We provide that report directly to the provost, who then puts it in a portal, and that is what the faculty are able to see. We do not have the capabilities of producing ad hoc tenure reports for faculty. We don't have the manpower for it, and the system doesn't do that. We have to manually manipulate the data. It is not a simple data dump. As faculty, you are keeping up with your current and pending. Every time you submit your proposal, you have to submit a current and pending, and so that is what you can use for your tenure report, but we cannot provide it on an ad hoc basis. So on this page, our main contact is osp@utdallas.edu. You can send anything to that and we will get back to you. We have our main webpage, and on the templates, samples, and resources is the funded proposal library. That's where that is housed. And then we have our Sea Grant Opportunities website and the OR portal. So the OR portal is where you would go to make a record to let OSP know that you are submitting something. It's also where you would apply to your Sea Grant opportunities, and it's also where we house funding opportunities, like I referenced that some funders send us they send us solicitations directly to our central office. We will put them in the OR portal as well. So it has lots of stuff in it. And so now I will open it up if there are any questions.
Thank you, Emily. I have a question. It is, how do I determine whether to contact Office of Sponsored Projects or Foundation Relations?
So that would be, you don't really need to determine who you should go with. You can go to anybody in any of the offices and we will figure it out amongst ourselves. A lot of the times it will depend on our past history with the sponsor, or it could even depend upon what the time frame is. But we will be the ones who anybody can help you, and we will just work behind the scenes to figure that out.
Thank you. And the next question is, what if it's a limited submission?
So limited submissions are solicitations that have a limit on how many the university can submit. This is not a limit on how many the individual PI can submit. It's through the university as a whole. And so the OR portal that I just mentioned is where we have those opportunities. It currently has all of the identified limited submission opportunities, but if you find one that is not on there, you can just let us know, and we work together through that. If there are some that are foundations, I'll work with Lena and Julie to make sure that they're in the portal, or that we have another alternative method of identifying who exactly is the best prospect, and it'll go through the regular limited submission process.
Thank you, Emily. The next question is for either Lena or Julie. Will you write my proposal for me?
I'm happy to take a stab at answering that one. So as Emily alluded to in her presentation, we are not scientists, so we are not the experts in writing a proposal about your science. You are the expert. So we provide editing help. We can provide assistance developing a budget. We can provide assistance developing outcomes or language around how you will sustain your project after the initial funding is expired. But we are not in the best position to write proposals in many cases. But we're here to assist.
Thank you, Julie. And the next question is, can you find funding opportunities for me? If Foundations Relations, Julie or Lena could respond to that.
Sure, I'll take that one. Yes, absolutely. We're again, I just want to say that we are a very small team of two. So we can't do extensive research, but we are very familiar with a lot of local and national foundations. So if you have a project in mind and you're struggling yourself to find some private funding, we're happy to take a look, and there may be some good opportunities. Again, a part of our role at the university is to know what's going on at UT Dallas and know some of the up and coming projects and activities that are happening. So we're always eager to learn and hear about what you're doing. Yes, we would be absolutely happy to do at least a little bit of legwork and see what we can find for you.
Thank you, Julie. And Emily, did you want to weigh in on that question as well?
Yes, as Lena said, we are not science people, so we don't necessarily understand the differences and the nuances involved in each science, and so the matchmaking is more between you and the funder. Pivot is an awesome resource. I would highly recommend using Pivot just because you can include and exclude things and it has everything in it, and so we rely on the faculty to identify the opportunities that they feel their science is the best fit for, and that's kind of what the Road to DC is for, is to help understand how to contact the program officer to make the request of whether it truly does fit the call. Even though you feel it does, it's best to talk to the program officer to make sure they feel the same way.
Excellent. There are no additional questions in the queue at this time. So Julie, Lena, and Emily, thank you for sharing your time and knowledge with the attendees. Audience, thank you for attending today's session. To view a full list of Office of Research events, visit research.utdallas.edu. Thank you and have a nice afternoon.